Hey, Chip, how are you? Obviously, I'm not George.
I was about to say, you look a little different than last time I saw you.
Yep. So let me start our streaming and we'll go from here. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to MSP Initiative's weekly podcast every Tuesday and Thursday. Many of you know me, even though it says George Bardisi. I am Pete Bussum from Equilibrium and the part of MSPI from a partner perspective. I'm joined today by Chip Reaves. Chip, I have probably not seen you in 10 years, or how long has it been now that since you started Bigger Brains?
Well, technically we celebrated our 10-year anniversary last month.
Yeah,
So yeah,
I think the last time I saw you was at a CRN event, right as you were getting ready to kick out and start up.
yeah, probably SMB Nation maybe, but yeah, it's been a minute.
Yeah, so shock, right? George is down here. You know, we're down here for IT Nation and
Yeah.
the Orlando MSP Initiative block party and doing the final throws here. And George was down at Axient getting ready to fly up this morning, and there was a plane malfunction. So he just actually got up in the air, and I get the great pleasure of joining you and talking with you and bantering with you today and having some fun. Maybe we'll relive some old stories along the way of the old guys of the channel, right?
Well, yeah, there you go. Well, yeah, I was at the CMIT conference last week and had all kinds of plane trouble getting back, so I can definitely sympathize.
So, to kick off, again, this is the MSP Initiative Tuesday and Thursday podcast. We're actually broadcasting down in Orlando today. And Chip, it looks like you're in your home office. Are you down in this area for this event? Or
No, I hate to be missing it, but no, I did two back-to-back conferences the last couple of weeks, and I'm just a little too old to do 3 weeks back-to-back. So I'm home in South Carolina. I'm in my office in South Carolina today.
Oh, really? Where in South Carolina are you?
So we're in Anderson, a little bit south of
Okay.
Greenville.
Yep. I'm down in Myrtle.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're down in the low country.
Yep, I came down from New Jersey and moved down there about a little over 6 years ago. So
There's a surprising number of MSPs I've met who are either retiring or like semi-retiring and moving to the Carolinas, sometimes moving to Florida, but I've met several that are retiring to the Carolinas.
it's not a bad place to be.
Nah, and the winters are certainly a lot easier than what you might see in New Jersey.
Yeah, well, my winter jacket is a hoodie. So
Of course.
So, we enjoyed your team was counter to us at DattoCon from an Equilibrium perspective, and we go back way back. But why don't you give us a quick intro to Bigger Brains and a little bit of background on you guys, where you came from, and then I want to kind of dovetail in and talk about how the training environment has changed and how you've adapted to that.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. So my background is, of course, in the channel. I started my first VAR back in '89, technically, which is very telling. And in '99, I bought the rights to a franchise called Computer Troubleshooters. They were Australian based at the time, and I brought them over to the US. So for the next 13 years, I basically helped people start their own IT services business. Originally, it was more of a break fix model. In 2006, we moved to a managed services model. And so I did that for 13 years. And as the franchisor, my job was basically helping the franchisees be successful, right? Looking for new vendor opportunities, negotiating vendor deals, looking for changes in the business model, like when we changed to managed services, doing internal education. So we had built out an internal training platform where we could share sales and marketing and business operations and product knowledge and that sort of thing. And in 2011, By this time, my original partners in Australia had retired. We had a new private equity firm who had kind of bought out their stake, and they were kind of running the show at that point. But in 2011, I was basically looking at what do our MSPs need today that we don't already have, right? So we got the cloud vendors, we got the security vendors, we have the business model, we got the PSA, we got the RMM. What else is there? What else do we need to be more successful? And one of the things that bubbled up in our research was training. It wasn't a huge request from customers, but we would get requests from time to time. Can you show me how to use Excel? Can you show me how to use QuickBooks? Can you teach my staff how to be HIPAA compliant? Things like that. But especially as we were starting to move more into cloud applications, there were just a lot of opportunities where customers were having a harder time, not necessarily using the product, but using the product effectively, right? Like anybody can send email with Outlook, probably. I mean, maybe not my grandmother, but most people can send email with Outlook and be fine. But to actually use Outlook effectively, to like use all the productivity tools, things like the categories, things like folders and tags and rules and automation and that sort of thing, needs a little bit of extra knowledge. So we saw education as an opportunity both as its own line of revenue, but also as a way to enhance our other revenue streams. If we could help our customers be more productive with things like what would be Microsoft 365, it didn't exist in 2011 yet, but that we would be more successful. So that idea inside Computer Troubleshooters is what later became Bigger Brains in 2012. Are we streaming okay?
Yep, there we go.
Okay.
I'm flying. Everybody's in transit today, so last minute, I booted up in the hotel here, and I'm not as fluent with the streaming as I probably should be. So we're good though.
No, I totally understand. Do we need to start over?
Nope, keep going.
Okay.
You're good.
So yeah, so that was the original plan, was we were going to offer a training platform for our MSPs, our franchisees at the time, where they could offer training to their customers. We were basically going to take the same training platform that we had built inside Computer Troubleshooters. We were going to spin it around and fill it with customer-facing titles, right? So Microsoft Excel, QuickBooks, HIPAA compliance, that sort of thing. And that's what we started doing in 2012. Now, what happened along the way was my private equity partners didn't like that idea. They had different directions they wanted to go. So it was a good time for me to exit Computer Troubleshooters and basically take that training idea and make it its own business, which became Bigger Brains.
So interesting, like, we think of, computer training companies as the traditional things, like you did a computer troubleshooter, right? And, we've seen a lot of them come and go, some pretty big names too, that were out, national footprints, international footprints. And,
Oh, yeah.
They come and even like some of the big brand name software companies have given their shot at doing training centers and things like that. What's evolved, and what is it? What was it, and what evolved, and how did you kind of see it to get to that shift point and that pivot point for you?
Well, I'll never take any credit for anything, but Bigger Brains kind of came along after the classroom evolution. So if you're talking about companies like New Horizons and all these companies that were like national chains that did in-person classroom training, what happened is in the mid 2000s, 2005 to 2010, we started to see the rise of e-learning. Now, e-learning had been around since technically the late 80s, early 90s in some form. But we started to see the rise of it as a viable option. And so we started to see a shift in, rather than people taking a day and signing up for a class at a training center where they had to leave work and go and get trained at the training center, that they would prefer to just sign up for a while. It was training on CD or training on VHS, right? So you'd buy a CD or a DVD, you'd get it in the mail, you could watch the training course that way. And then it started to be streaming. And for us, the inside computer troubleshooters, we had about 450 locations, and we were in 33 countries at that point. So it was just not feasible for people to come to our location for training. We had a training center in the UK. We had my training center in Atlanta. We had training centers in Australia, did some in New Zealand and other places too. But even so, even just Atlanta, all of our locations in the US couldn't come back to Atlanta when they needed training. And especially they couldn't send their employees. If you hire a new employee and you want them to get up to speed on how you're doing sales and marketing, it just doesn't make sense to send them to Atlanta for a week for that kind of thing. Most of the time. Sometimes it does. Most of the time it doesn't. And the idea actually came from one of our MSPs, one of our franchisees. We had an annual conference every year inside Computer Troubleshooters, and it was the 2009 conference, I think. It was in Phoenix, Arizona. And at the end of every conference, I would have a session where I would take questions from all the franchisees. And one of the questions was, hey, if we're the world's largest IT service provider, why don't we have any online training? And I thought, that's a really good question. Let me look into that. And we had done like webinars and stuff like that. But then when we had like an FTP server, I think at the time, where we would save recordings of the webinars, but not the same thing. So I literally went back to my hotel that night, Googled online training, found a platform that did online training, signed up for it there in the hotel. And within a week, we were starting to take a lot of our in-person training and record it and put it in a hosted environment, which just opens up all kinds of doors, right? In the same way that we see with the cloud services of any kind or SaaS services, now all of a sudden anybody can get access to it. It's really inexpensive. You don't have to designate a certain time, right? They can access it 24/7, 365, whenever it's convenient for them. Since then, we've seen more of an evolution towards things like micro learning, where instead of having a 1-hour class or a 4-hour class or something like that, you break it up into 5 or 10-minute lesson chunks, so that when you're taking it, you can choose to take one lesson, a couple lessons, whatever you have time for, go back to work, and then come back to it later. So
you mean for people with attention spans like mine?
For people with attention spans like all of us. That's been the interesting thing too, is watching the evolution of that nugget size, right? Because when we got started, our original production guidelines for Bigger Brains, this is back in 2012, was that we would never have a lesson that was longer than 15 minutes, because that seemed reasonable at the time. And I think we had one lesson that was 18 minutes one time, but that was overall it. Today, it's unheard of to have a lesson that long. Our lessons have to be less than 10 minutes, and we aim for 5 to 8 minutes. And that's not just us, that's the whole industry. The flip side, though, is also true. There have been some people that have tried to go super short with the lessons, like 1 or 2 minutes. And that people don't like that as much either, because you just get a lot of back-to-back lessons. You don't really get enough meat on the bone, in a really short lesson like that. But 5 to 8 minutes seems to be the sweet spot.
So what drives that 5 to 8 minutes? What is it? Just truly attention span or absorption?
I think so. I think it's a lot of things. I think we're number one. I used to say we're conditioned by TV and movies, but today I think more and more we're conditioned by social media and things like YouTube. That we're used to that 3 to 5 to 8 minute time span for things. And truthfully, my younger staff, the 8-minute videos, they think are super long. I mean, a lot of people, they'll tell us in the comments, when they're looking at videos on social media, when they're looking at videos on like an open platform like YouTube, they look at the length. And if it's more than 3 minutes, they're not going to invest in it, because that's just too long.
It's like the TED Talks of learning.
Yeah, exactly. And even TED Talks are considered too long by some people now. So, go figure.
Right. So what has been the shift? Like, we used to do a lot of like productivity training, like you said, like Microsoft or Outlook, but where have we shifted now in the big topics? What are the big things that are coming out and being really consumed?
Well, it's I mean, no huge surprise, but cybersecurity training is massive. We only get into that a little bit. We have a couple of courses on that, because there's the Nova 4s and Hook Securities and Cyber Hoots and those guys out there that specialize in it, Ninjios and them. but that's a big one. Anytime you've got a course that's required by business, which I think cybersecurity should be required for any business nowadays. But then in some industries and in some geographies, you have like workplace harassment is required for businesses above a certain size. You may have things like HIPAA or FINRA or PCI compliance that's going to be required. Certain companies are going to require diversity training or conflict management, things like that. We get into those a little bit with bigger brains, but a lot of those are outside our scope too. Where we tend to see the most though is the personal productivity courses, time management, email management, managing your meetings, things like that.
Nice. Yeah, I find it interesting that we've gone from such a structured approach, because back in the day when there was this thing called Novell, I was a certified Novell instructor, and it was very regimented on how we delivered the class, the lab time versus whatever, and then into obviously the testing and all that. So when you look back at a model like that and you talk about these consumption models of these little nibbles of, 8 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever it is, do you see people consuming more of it, or is it about the same, less?
That's a really good question. I would have to say in general, we're seeing more of it, but it may not be the whole thing. The trick with the Novell training, or like I was certified Lantastic back in the day because I dealt with smaller companies. There's a big block of training there, right? I mean, I remember those Novell books. You had a couple of like 2 or 3 inch thick manuals that came with the cert, and all of that information was necessary, but only necessary sometimes. People today are really only looking for the training that they need right now. That don't teach me things that I'm never going to use. Don't teach me things that don't come up in my line of business or that don't come up in my job role. Teach me the things that I'm going to need to use. And if you don't have it, then they're just going to go find it on YouTube, or they'll find it on Microsoft site, or they'll find it, somewhere like that. So you see a lot more usage. People are a lot more into it because they're looking for what's relevant for them right now, not just something they're taking to get a cert. But you do see less of that formal training. In fact, we're having a conversation internally right now. One of our partners has asked us if we'll create a line of CompTIA certs for them, which we've gotten into a little bit in the past. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's totally there's some value to the CompTIA certs. You could argue whether it's I would never hire somebody based on their CompTIA certs, but if somebody's looking to get in the business, then it's not a bad place to start.
Yeah.
But it's still that very structured, you have to hit all the objectives kind of a training, and that's not bad, but it is going to be, a certain length, it's going to be a certain structure, and we're not sure if that's an area that we want to get into or not. So we're still debating on that.
So, you've been at all of these events, you were out at DattoCon, and obviously you were just out at the one event you mentioned.
The CMIT franchise.
CMIT, yeah. And, how are these different groups consuming? Are they coming to you as a group buying power now? Or are they, are they just kind of, you have your booth and you're attracting? Like what gets people looking for training companies now versus just searching the web?
It's a good question. I mean, it depends on the customer, right? And that's part of the challenge for us is convincing MSPs that when their customers looking for training, that the MSP should be a solution versus just saying, well, the community college is down the road, or YouTube's online, or stuff like that. So the compelling part for us is showing that there's a value proposition for the MSP, right? It's going to be an additional line of revenue, or it's going to enhance the value of their service plans. But B, also showing that it's relevant, that it's something that their clients would appreciate and would like to be involved with. So it really just depends. And over time, I mean, when we first got started, when we launched in 2012, it is absolutely amazing that we had any MSP sign up at all, which we did, and God bless everyone who signed up with us back then. But we had like 6 courses, and we had the beginnings of a platform, and there wasn't a lot of content there. But and most were honestly people I knew in the industry and franchisees I'd worked with, and God bless them. They helped us get started. Today we've got a couple hundred courses. We've got a few thousand videos. We've got a Microsoft Teams app. We have a much better platform, and the pricing's actually gone down. So I think the value proposition is a lot better for most MSPs nowadays. But we're continuing to evolve, continuing to grow. The most common request we get is, because our training is very much focused on the end user, I've had a lot of requests lately from MSPs who want to use it for their technicians, but that's not really been our market. So we don't really have a lot of technician training, but we are looking at some options that may give us some more of that in the future.
So, when I think of training, I always think of the people that go in the room and they get a bunch of books and they rip out data and all that. But what does it look like, the development cycle of, what do you have to put in these days? Without obviously not giving away your secret sauce, but what does it take to take a course from, thought process to, publishing and availability for consumption?
That's a great question. And it's something that I had to learn a lot of. I mean, I'm an IT guy, I came from an IT background, and one of the books that was fundamental for me, in fact, I might have a copy of it, but no chance, don't have a prop. One of the books that we spent a lot of time with in the early days of Bigger Brains, as we're kind of prepping our process, is a book called Telling Ain't Training. And it really kind of opened my eyes to the fact that, I was used to, a client has a question, you sit down, you show them how to do it. Somebody wants to learn how to do QuickBooks, somebody wants to learn how to do, mail merge in Word or something like that. I sit down and show them the steps, and that's what you do. But Telling Ain't Training and other books really kind of opened my eyes to the fact that if you're going to be doing training professionally, you need to have a plan. There needs to be a process, and it needs to be very outcome driven, right? So if someone is going to take this course, if someone's going to watch this lesson, what's the outcome that you're trying to achieve? Because it's so easy to go off on tangents, to show all kinds of features, especially with software training. I mean, there's so many things you can do inside Teams or SharePoint or OneDrive or Outlook or whatever, that you can spend a lot of time showing stuff that's not relevant for that lesson. So you want to have a process that starts with a list of objectives for the course and then a list of objectives for each lesson. So the goal of this lesson is, by the end of this lesson, you'll be able to X, Y, and Z, and start with that. And then make sure that whatever you're doing inside that lesson matches up to the objectives. So if you've got anything in that lesson that's not leading to those objectives, either it needs to be taken out, or the objectives need to be changed to accommodate it. But thinking of things in that way and thinking through that kind of structure was a very different mindset for me. So that was that took a little getting used to.
So what was the biggest, I always love to hear like fellow entrepreneurs, right? They've come from the MSP space and they've transitioned over to a not only a different business model, but a total different line of business that dovetails into what they used to do. What made you think about really like transitioning, and like for all of these entrepreneurs looking for like guys like, I was an MSP and I transitioned over to really being a coaching and marketing platform for MSPs. So, we all have like kind of a story that influenced us. What influenced that for you?
Well, I think it's a couple things. One, I think, I kind of had to, in my situation at the time with computer troubleshooters, I had some private equity guys that I wasn't getting along with, so I needed to do something else. And I was going to have a non-compete that wasn't going to let me, go be an MSP again, as naturally would be the case. But I think there's also, I don't know about you, but I think for a lot of us, part of the attraction of growing your own business is the challenge, right? It's the, how do I get the business started? And then how do I get the business, profitable? And then how do I get the business to the next level? How do I bring on my first employees? How do I, get past 100,000 in revenue, 500,000 in revenue, $1 million in revenue, 5 million in revenue? And so you've got these kind of challenges along the way, and the business changes, right? I mean, it's still a managed services business, or it's still an IT support business, but it changes both in terms of, the nature of the business operations, because running a 10-person business is very different than running a 1-person business. You know that. But also the nature of technology is always changing. I mean, the kinds of things that we're working on today are fundamentally different than things we were working on 10, 20 years ago, right? So there's always this evolution in the technology. But then sometimes it's just good to have a whole new challenge, right? And say, okay, I finished that game. I got to the end. I killed the big boss. What's a new challenge I can do? And that's, at least for me, that was part of the attraction of Bigger Brains was, can I grow a business in a totally different industry? What does that look like? And yeah, that's where we came from.
Yeah, I think, very similar, right? It's like there was some passion or something for that one segment of business, and then there was the opportunity, and then, how do you get it over the rails and stop talking about it and actually do it, right?
Yeah,
The biggest problem, right?
Yeah, and passion's a good word because passion changes, right? I mean, I've actually built 5 MSPs over the years, and enjoyed each of them, and they were all different. But like in the early days, I really got a kick out of working directly with the customer, solving the problem, screwdriver in hand, leaving and there. I used to describe it as kind of the Lone Ranger syndrome. You ride into town and they're struggling with a problem, and then you solve their problem and you ride away and they wave, "Thank you, kind stranger," as you're leaving. I used to really enjoy that in the first business that I had, and maybe the second business that I had too. But eventually you kind of get to where you're more motivated by building a new line of business, or you're more motivated by growing employees, or you're more motivated by moving into a different location, or whatever. That passion can change over time, and I think it's important as a business owner to recognize that too, because if your passion is no longer in the business that you're running, the business that you're building, it's a whole lot harder to run. It's a whole lot harder to run a business that you're not excited about.
Yeah, I agree. And there's always those days somewhere along the line where you have to do something to reignite, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I over the years, I mean, I'm a couple MSPs behind. I've only done 3, but I did an MSP and an ISP. So
Oh, wow.
which was a tremendous learning curve in itself. But we look at just the industry, and now is here where I kind of go back on a little bit of where we've come from, right? And you've come from, and the path that you've come from. What do you think the biggest obstacles for MSPs are right now? Where do you see, like if you were to say, boy, if I could add some special training into the mix for MSPs, what would it be? What would Chip's crystal ball of training be for an MSP now?
It's on the one hand, I think it's a lot harder to start an MSP now than it ever has been, just because when I was getting started, when we were getting started, it felt like there was more, there was less that you had to learn, right? You needed to know how the technology worked, and you needed to know a little bit about marketing, and something about accounting and business operations. But you could kind of pick those up and then pick up the rest over time, right? You could start from there. For a managed service business today, you really you've got to have a tech stack, right? You've got to have software tools in place. You've got to have a better idea of who your target market is, what you're going to specialize in. You got to have a better idea of the tools you're going to use. You're probably going to need, right from the start, additional people, because there's going to be expertise outside of your own skill set. So I think it's harder to start as a one-man shop today. Not saying it's impossible by any means, though, because the flip side is also true. There's more resources out there today to help MSPs get started, whether it's the franchises like CMIT and TechLogic and Computer Troubleshooters, or whether it's industry resources like Robin Robbins and Dave Seibert and all the conferences that we go to. IT Nation is a great example this week. There's so many places where you can learn from those of us with gray hair who've walked the path before, and all the vendors who have targeted this market. Yeah, well,
What are you saying there, Chip?
mine's much grayer than yours.
Uh, yeah, I don't know. I think it's just wet from walking around in the rain down here in Orlando right now. So.
You know what I mean? So there's a lot of there's a lot of resources to help you grow. And when I was at the CMIT conference last week, in the keynote, their CEO said, and part of this is just rah rah and cheerleading like you might expect, but I think it's really true that there's never been a better time to be an MSP, and I think that's true. There's just so much you can do. There's so many niches available. There's so much opportunity, and there's so many needs that our clients have. They're a little bit higher level than they used to be. It may be more no code, low code type automation problems. It may be more unified communication situations, definitely opportunities in security and things like that. And I think training kind of permeates all of that, right? Training for your end users and how to use whatever solution it is that you're setting up needs to always be a factor in it, because your clients are in the same place. It's not as easy for them either. There's not a manual that comes with their software that they can pick up and flip through and learn how to do stuff like we had in the old days. They pick it up by learning online, and again, they can do the basics pretty easily, but learning how to use those tools effectively, learning how to get the most out of them, especially for that monthly SaaS bill that they're paying, is that needs some extra help.
Yeah. There's always the two sides of training, right? There's the end user facing training, and then there's the how to fix it type training, yeah. Right? And so, training a technical workforce is way different than training your end users. So
totally different. And that's part of why we don't really get too much into that with Bigger Brains, because it is such its own specialty. And there's places like Pluralsight and Stone River that specialize in technical training, and a lot of vendors that offer it too. So that's what we made the decision to be the end user guys, and that's so far served us well.
Yeah, it's good. Well, we've got our usual group of attendees here, and I've asked them all to unmute so they can ask you questions directly. So guys, you know how we roll here. This is radio style here. So, you're all in, you've got the hotline, and you guys can unmute and feel free to ask anything directly to Chip or jump in on the conversation. So Chip, some of the things that we're seeing in industry, consolidations and all that, why should MSPs look at training as, part of their solution or instead of an add-on? Like, why, how should they be treating it? What advice can you give to them?
I think the important thing is to look at the solutions that we're offering, not through the eyes of an MSP, not through the eyes of a technician, and not even through the eyes of an end user, but look at it through the eyes of a manager on the client side. Because certainly managing people was never my strong suit. I got into technology for a reason, right? I'm much more comfortable sitting down behind a keyboard than I am meeting face to face with somebody. Something I've had to learn over the years, obviously. But now that I've learned it, one thing I recognize is whenever I'm considering a new solution, like we're looking at a new CRM solution right now, one of the biggest factors that I'm thinking about is, are my people going to know how to use it? Are my people going to be able to figure this out? Is it going to be an obstacle for them? Is it going to be something that they're going to struggle with, that's going to take more time away from their normal work they're supposed to be doing? If I'm working with an MSP who can offer a training product that helps me with that shows how I'm going to achieve better productivity, better profitability by getting deeper into something like Teams or something like Outlook or something like SharePoint, how that's going to benefit my business, that becomes almost more compelling than the dollars and cents and nuts and bolts part of it, right? Because at the end of the day, it's all about, is it actually going to get used? That's, Microsoft changed over the whole certified partner program, right? And we used to be a silver partner, and now we're looking at the new competencies and adding up our points to see what we can achieve in the new system. And at first I was kind of bothered by the fact that so much of the new point system is based on usage. right? It's not just adding new clients anymore, and it's not just getting your own people certified, although that's part of it. But it's also seeing more usage in things like Teams or Teams Voice or SharePoint or whatever in the Microsoft program. And after thinking about it for a while, I think it makes total sense from Microsoft's perspective, because they're in the same boat. They've got all these great solutions that they've rolled into the Microsoft 365 tech stack. Same thing on the Google side. I'm just more of a Microsoft guy. But the solutions are no good unless people are actually using them, unless they're actually, using them to benefit their business, using them to benefit their life, whatever the purpose is. And that's where I think training comes in. I think training is a great way to help people use that tech stack more and be more productive with it and get more out of it.
Yeah, I often think of like the example that I used to use, like when Outlook was really coming into business and we were migrating people from like CC Mail or, one of the older platforms, or Lotus Notes Mail, or, as they merged and, Outlook started to become that predominant, we would do a cutover. And the last thing we would think about was training the end user. And we probably lost a good opportunity, or, we'll just send one of our engineers over and they'll sit with your people. And we ended up doing, a really poor job because it wasn't our core competence. We would muddle our way through it, but it was like, and when we finally got the light bulb to engage with a company that did it and bring it in as our total scope of work, things just went so much easier. They were prepared. They were on site to answer questions and help, move around on the floor while the techs were working on more things like, where did my one message go, or my calendar, or, and the technical people could focus on one thing and the training, partner could focus on it. And once we decided to do that, it became so much better, as a good opportunity.
Yeah. And if you think about it, I mean, especially in this era of managed services where, it used to be you kind of occasionally added customers, occasionally lost customers. But with a managed service plan, there's a very definitive decision point, right? Contracts up for renewal. Is the customer going to renew or not? And a lot of that, we like to think is a logical decision, right? If we're offering enough value, if we've protected them from these things, if we've given them these new tools, all these benefits, that they're going to renew with us. But practically speaking, the manager, the decision maker, the boss is going to be talking to the team and saying, hey, Pete's contract's coming up for renewal. What do we think about him? Do we want to keep this going? And if they've had a situation where, even if it was the company decided to switch over to Google Workspace and it went poorly because people didn't know how to use it, that might have been a management decision. But if Pete and Pete's guys were the ones that were doing the implementation, they're the ones that the employees are going to say, oh yeah, he's that guy that stuck us with that crappy Google product. I think we can do better, and so you want to get on the employee's good side to keep the contract renewals coming. And again, I think that's where training can make a play too.
Yeah. And training is not a very glamorous subject. Like, a lot of topics that we do, it's just not glamorous. It's like, people are like told you have to go to training, or you have to go and do that diversity training, or that HR training, for equity, or,
Yeah.
how not to sexually harass somebody, the HR series of things that everybody has from a compliance and new onboarding. But, what are some other opportunities that MSPs can look for in training, for, as they look out into their base?
So for us, we're pretty heavy in the software training. And one thing that I always think about is, this is a true story. It was a client of mine. It was an engineering company. They actually did concrete structures. And the whole company was like half engineers and half architects. And they had one office manager and two accountants, but one office manager. And she was the one that did all of the Microsoft Office work, right? And she was the Microsoft Office expert of the office. Whenever they had to send out a customer quote, she would type it up. Whenever they had to do an invoice, she would type it up. And she went on vacation, and they called me up, and they needed to make a change to a proposal that she had sent out the week before. And they had gone on her computer, but they couldn't find the proposal. and they asked if I could come and help them find this proposal so they could change it. And I was like, well, if you want to pay consulting, project fees for me to come out to look for a document, sure, I'll come out and look for a document. Granted, this is before Cloud Drive, so it might have been a little different now. But I go out there and I look on her computer, and I open Excel where she did the quotes, and sure enough, there's only one file in the recents list. And come to find out that she just had one proposal document, and every time she did a new one, she just typed over the same document. She didn't know that she could save it as a different file. And they asked me if I would type up the new proposal for them and make the changes. And I was like, well, pay my rates for me to type? Sure, I'll type. So I went in, I started typing in the new lines in the proposal. And I noticed that as I was changing the line items, the grand total wasn't changing. And I noticed there was a calculator on her desk next to her keyboard. So I talked to her when she got back from vacation, and sure enough, she didn't know that Excel could add things up for you. So here's somebody who was the office expert. She was good at her job. Everybody said she was good at her job, but she was working so much harder than she needed to because she was missing some tech skills. She was missing a little bit of tech training that would have made her life so much easier, would have made the business more efficient, more profitable. And I always think about that. I think we underestimate the amount of improvement people can have with just something like Microsoft Office training. But then also there's the whole, there's the compliance training, there's the HIPAA training, there's the QuickBooks training, and my view on things like like HIPAA and sexual harassment, those things that are required, they're mandatory. And like you said, nobody enjoys them. It's not something anybody looks forward to. So we try to make those courses fun. We try to make them interesting. Our sexual harassment course has characters that are actually going through a story, and they're extremely colorful. It's a really interesting story. It was written by a young lady that works with us that's now written short films that are on HBO Max. I mean, she's really amazing. But you look for those opportunities too. So even though it's required, it doesn't have to be boring. It doesn't have to be painful. It can be fun.
Cool. All right. Well, we've got about 10 minutes or so, I think, left in our session today. And I do want to get to a couple things that are happening down here in Orlando. So obviously IT Nation is there. And are you guys attending IT Nation? Do you have folks down here? Or?
We're not. It's normally for the IT events. It's always either myself or Nancy Williams. A lot of folks know Nancy. She's been around forever, but she's in Guam and I'm in South Carolina. So we're missing all the fun this week.
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, at DattoCon, I think I got hit by Nancy 3 or 4 times by those sponge brains when I wasn't looking, and they just come right. You could see this ball of different colors coming, running at you, and saying, "Where did that come from?" And Nancy kind of turning her back and chuckling really quickly and saying, "I did it again." As we were catty corner across the way from her, so.
It's always, yeah.
That's because Nancy threw them at everybody and gave them out. But you definitely a fun person out on the show floor and good time with it. Where are you guys next?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. Nancy does all the scheduling. I don't think we have anything scheduled until the spring. I think we're talking about possibly doing Tech Fest in Q1 out in Anaheim. I think we've got a couple of ASCII shows lined up for next year, and the IT Compass show I think is on track for next year. But that's all I know about so far.
Yeah, we're adding to the calendar and trying to build out this master calendar of events here, and I think we're going to publish it on the MSP Initiative website at some point as another community resource. So that'll be good. So we're down here and we're getting ready for this big party here, and of course we do 9 months worth of planning, and then lo and behold, Mr. Weatherman gets on there and says, "Yeah, well, we've got this potential hurricane showing up." So now we're having a lot of fun of readjusting in 2 days what we built in 9 months to move indoors.
I've been hearing the hurricane news and totally didn't think about IT Nation being affected. Oh, that's going to be rough.
Well, IT Nation itself is good, but the party is an outdoor event, featuring the All-American Rejects and
Mhm.
a lot of outdoor type activities. So, and anybody can, you don't have to be going to IT Nation. If you're an MSP and you want to join us, you can go to, MSP Block Party and .com, and you can sign up and easily get signed up and come to it and enjoy it. And we're going to be inside, and we're going to simulcast to all of the venues, right? And I'm not going to be pushing the buttons, because we saw early on in this cast how technically qualified I was not to do. So,
No, you're
but
fine.
yep, we're out there, and as we always like to say, this is the biggest and the end party for the channel here. It's a great party. I think there's over 50 sponsors now that will be represented, in the venue
Wow.
and participating. And there's going to be some pretty nice door prizes that will be announced from partners. Really cool that we never had before was there's Malware Bytes is it Malware Bytes? Yeah, Malware Bytes is doing an airbrush hat, custom airbrush hat. So that's kind of cool.
What's
And
an airbrush hat?
yeah, you can get something airbrushed on the hat, like a
Oh,
pattern or a picture, or and they guess they've got some kind of like hats that they're bringing, and they'll airbrush some pattern or picture, or who knows. I'm excited to see what they're going to do with that, because
yeah, it's
I've
gonna be
never
fun.
seen one before, right? And then of course there's the obvious of booze, and then there's a lot of food that will be there for purchase. And we're running buses to and from the main facility. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's a shame that, we'll miss you at this one. But I'm sure we're going to see you at other events that MSP Initiative puts on, and
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
get you back out there as we roll into 23 and beyond. Um, so I think as we've got a couple minutes left, is there anything that you'd like to spool out or put out to the community about Bigger Brains, or what's going on with you guys? What's next?
Actually, we do have some pretty cool stuff coming out pretty soon. I'm not supposed to talk about it though, but I guess just stay tuned for some of it. We did roll out a new feature today, which I think is kind of cool, and it foreshadows something else that's coming out, which is if you're in our system and you're in one of our courses and you are in a lesson that you think somebody else can benefit from, there's now a share button. So you can share that lesson with them, regardless of whether they're set up in our platform. So for example, if you're a technician and you have a customer that's struggling with something like understanding a phishing email or how to do a mail merge in Word, you can find that lesson in the course, hit share, and send it to their email or send it to them in Microsoft Teams. So we're pretty excited about that. It'll be even more useful once we get some more IT focused type lessons in there, which may be coming in the near future too.
Good. So, the biggest question is or not question, but I appreciate you joining me today in my state of chaos.
I appreciate you having me.
And I know I have the likeness of George Knott, but it's great to catch up with you, Chip, after all these years, and I look forward to seeing you out in person next year and on the circuit. But how do people get in touch with you? How do they connect with you?
Sure. So our special MSP site is www.biggermsp.com. That's the easiest way. We're also at getbiggerbrains.com, but the MSP program is secret, and so it's hidden at biggermsp.com.
We just spooled it all over the internet on Facebook Live. So.
Oh, well, okay. Nobody say anything.
Yep. Secret.
Nice.
So yep, join us here every Tuesday and Thursday at 1:00 Eastern. Each week we have different guests from different partners in the community that are out there, have great programs or thought-provoking conversation. And certainly if you're in Orlando and you are an MSP, come on out and join us tomorrow night at the MSP Initiative channel, or I should say community block party. I should know, this should just roll off my tongue, right? But the MSP Initiative community block party, and all of our great sponsors that are going to be joining us out there this event. And George will be back on Thursday, I think, if he survives Wednesday night and we don't all have nervous breakdowns, putting it all together with the rain. So that's it. Thanks everything. Thanks so much, Chip, again for joining us. And this recording will be available out on MSP Initiative if anybody wants to share it or let anybody else know.
Awesome.
And we'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Bye now.
Thanks.